Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Rose Within the Thorns. I'm Mr. Rose, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Season 5 Poetry Edition. If you've listened to the first episode, you'll know what this season is all about. We're deconstructing poetry, not so we can memorize someone else's interpretation, but so we can better understand the ideas, emotions, and techniques that make poems powerful. Remember, these episodes are designed to support your reading. Before listening, you should have already read your poem or listened to it being read aloud. Keep a copy beside you if you can, because I'll be asking questions that you might like to jot down as we go. Today's poem is Text by Carol Ann Duffy. At first glance, it might seem to be two people sending messages to each other. But as is often the case with poetry, the text messages are really just the surface. Beneath them lies a much bigger conversation about love, communication, distance, and what it means to connect with another person. So let's begin by meeting the poet. Carol Ann Duffy is one of the most influential contemporary poets writing in English. Her work often explores identity, relationships, memory, gender, and the ways people communicate with one another. One of the things that makes Duffy's poetry so engaging is that she frequently takes ordinary experiences and reveals something extraordinary beneath them. In text, she does exactly that. Most of us send text messages every single day. They're quick, convenient, sometimes thoughtless, sometimes deeply meaningful. Duffy asks us to stop and think about something we rarely question. Can technology bring people closer together? Or can it remind us of how far apart we really are? As you think about today's poem, here's the question I'd like you to keep coming back to. Does communication always create connection? It sounds like an easy question, but the more you think about it, the more complicated it becomes. We can exchange hundreds of messages with someone and still feel lonely. We can be separated by thousands of kilometers and still feel incredibly close. The poem explores that tension beautifully. It's less interested in mobile phones than it is in the human relationships. Technology simply becomes the lens through which those relationships are explored. So let's begin deconstructing. The title. It's just one word, text. It's simple, modern, and familiar. Almost everyone knows exactly what the title refers to before reading the poem. But that simplicity is deceptive. As the poem develops, the meaning of text begins to expand. It isn't only about messages sent through a phone, it's also about language itself, how words carry emotion, how they fail us, how they bring us together, how they sometimes leave us wanting more. Notice how Duffy transforms something ordinary into something layered. That's a wonderful reminder that poets don't always need unusual subjects. Sometimes the most familiar experiences contain the richest ideas. Now think about the language that she uses. Throughout the poem, Duffy blends the language of everyday communication with more poetic imagery. Why might she do that? Perhaps she's suggesting that even the most ordinary conversations can hold extraordinary emotional significance. As readers, we're invited to look beyond the practical purpose of a message and instead think about what it represents: hope, longing, affection, maybe uncertainty. Another feature worth considering is contrast. The poem continually places ideas alongside one another: closeness and distance, presence and absence, connection and isolation. Technology allows communication to happen instantly, yet emotional distance can still exist. That contrast sits at the heart of this poem. It's one of the reasons the poem continues to resonate with readers. Let's think about the imagery that is used. So rather than treating technology as something cold or mechanical, Duffy often gives communication this emotional depth through the way that she speaks about the bird. The messages become more than information. They become symbols of relationship, just as like that XX, or symbols of waiting, anticipation, or of love. So ask yourself this: if phones disappeared from the poem, would the emotional journey still exist? I think absolutely. That's because technology isn't the real subject, human connection is. So let's look at the bigger ideas. The first is connection. What does it truly mean to feel connected to another person? Is communication enough? Or does real connection require something deeper? The second concept is love. Not simply romantic love, but the ways people express care, affection, and vulnerability. Another important concept is absence. Sometimes people feel most aware of someone when they're not physically present. The poem explores how absence can shape relationships just as much as presence. There's also the idea of communication itself. Can language ever completely express what we feel? Or are there some emotions that always remain just beyond words? Or are there emotions that we need to say to someone face to face? Finally, there's technology. Rather than celebrating or criticizing it outright, the poem asks readers to think critically about the role it plays in modern relationships. So here's today's tip. Whenever you study a poem that uses an everyday object, don't stop at identifying the object itself. Ask yourself, what does it represent? In this poem, the phone isn't just a phone. The messages aren't simply messages, they're symbols. They help the poet explore much larger questions about human experience. Great poets rarely write about objects, they write through objects. Now it's time for my favorite part of the episode, from poem to page. So let's think about how this poem could inspire an original narrative. Suppose the idea that stood out to you was that of connection. So perhaps your story follows two siblings who communicate only through notes left around the house because neither knows how to start a difficult conversation face to face. Or maybe you're interested in absence. So imagine a teenager who's continually sending messages to a loved one after they've moved away, not expecting replies, but finding comfort in the routine. Perhaps your concept that interests you most is miscommunication. A single misunderstood message could change the direction of an entire story. Or maybe you focus on waiting. Not waiting for a text message, but waiting for test results, a letter, a phone call, or a knock at the door. Notice how the emotional core remains the same even when the story is completely changed. That's exactly what we're aiming for. Borrow the concept, create your own narrative. Before we finish, I'd like you to think about this question. How often do we mistake communication for understanding? It's possible to hear someone's words without understanding their feelings. It's possible to receive a text message without truly knowing the person who sent it. Perhaps that's one of the most important ideas Duffy leaves us with. The challenge isn't simply the communication, it's to connect. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of A Rose Within the Thorns. I hope today's discussion has helped you see that even the most ordinary experiences can become extraordinary pieces of writing when we look beneath the surface. In next episode, we'll deconstruct another poem and continue building that collection of ideas, concepts, and writing inspiration that you can draw on in your own narratives. Until then, keep reading closely, keep asking questions, and remember, the strongest stories don't begin with a plot. They begin with an idea that refuses to let go. I'm Mr. Rose, and this has been A Rose Within the Thorns. Thank you for listening.